Warning: the following episode contains sensitive content such as child abuse, sexual abuse, and graphic descriptions of homicide. It may be sensitive to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Foster care is a system in which a child has been placed into a group home or private home of a foster parent. The placement of the child is typically arranged through a social service agency, with the state compensating the foster parent. Foster care is not to be a permanent solution, only a temporary arrangement in which the foster family provides for the care of a child when their biological parent or parents are unable to care for them. The goal for all involved is for the children to reunite with their family unless it's not possible or it is not in the best interest of the child. Unfortunately, one of the most misconceptions about foster care is that a child's bad behavior is the reason they enter into the foster care system. However, statistics tell a different story. Parental substance abuse, neglect, physical abuse, inadequate housing, parents being in jail, abandonment, and sexual abuse are just a few of the reasons a child is taken away from their parents. To date, there are roughly 1,500 children in foster care in the state of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, compared to their peers, former foster youth are more likely to end up in prison. 1 in 5 former foster youth nationwide are homeless at the age of 18. 70% of female former foster youth are pregnant before their 21st birthday, and just under 3% of all former foster youth eventually go on to obtain a college degree. Many foster youth are very resilient, with their day-to-day survival skills shaping them into becoming strong, self-reliant, and determined individuals. If given the same opportunities and support from their foster families, foster children can achieve great success. Grace Anastasia Packer was 3 years old when she officially became part of the system. The bubbly, happy girl endured a lifetime of pain and loss, from sexual abuse that led her birth parents to lose custody when she was 3, to the indecent assault charges that sent her adoptive father to prison when she was 10, to the unimaginable rape-murder fantasy led by her adoptive mother and her boyfriend. The irony is that Grace was taken from her birth parents because she was being neglected, yet she was placed into a home where, ironically, other foster children, including herself, were being abused and neglected. The system that was set up to make sure Grace was safe failed, resulting in her murder and dismemberment at the young age of 14. During Grace's short life, many red flags were raised about her safety, and as her family moved from county to county, child welfare agencies were unable to share their findings. The services provided to Grace were ineffective, and clear warning signs were ignored. Yet, years after Grace's murder, changes in the flawed foster and adoption systems still have not been made. The question is, how many more children will lose their lives until changes are made? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that every child is safe? Is it up to you and I to lobby and fight for every child in the foster care system so that they never suffer the same fate as Grace Packer? Or should agencies be held accountable for the mistakes they make along the way? You're listening to Departed in Pennsyltucky, Part 1, a system failed. The case of Grace Packer. Grace Anastasia Packer was born Susan Hunsaker on August 14, 2001. Daughter to Rose and Rodney Hunsaker, Susan was born 2 months premature, weighing in at only 4 pounds 5 ounces. So small that Rose dressed her in doll's clothing. Eventually, Susan would catch up to children her age, and the blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl with a big smile became Rose's whole world. In 2004, Berks County Children and Youth Services became involved in the family's life because extended relatives who lived in the home had been accused of sexually abusing children, and the fact that the Hunsakers could not afford to move into a home appropriate for the 3 small children, nor provide a safe environment for them. As a result, Rose and Rodney lost custody of all 3 children. The Hunsakers fought to regain custody of their children in 2004, but the odds were against them due to the couple's mental challenges, specifically Rose's bipolar and anxiety, and Rodney's intellectual challenges. Although Rose did have medication prescribed for her mental illness, she admitted she did not consistently take medicine as needed. Surely, it did not help the Hunsaker case. The placement of the 3 children came through Impact Project, an agency under contract in Berks County that provided foster and adoption services. Susan's older sister, who was 6 at the time, went to another foster home, and Susan and her younger brother were in the foster care of a married couple named David and Sara Packer. A native of Broadheadsville, Pennsylvania, Sara Packer had earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Randolph College in Virginia and worked there as an assistant teacher in a nursery school. After graduating, Sara worked as a caseworker at a number of organizations such as Communities and Schools, the Impact Project, and Big Brothers Big Sisters, all located in Lehigh County. In early 2003, Northampton County had approved Sara as an emergency hire as a caseworker, even before she had taken the state exam. But it was under the agreement that she had to be approved again to keep her position. Sara's position required her to work with foster children to create a permanent plan, such as adoption or placement with relatives. She was to provide support services to foster children and families, monitor the status of their living arrangements, and to make sure homes complied with foster care regulations. In September 2005, Sara was promoted, and again in June of 2007, she became a casework supervisor. Even though Rose and Rodney lost custody of Susan, her younger brother and older sister, they still continued to visit the children as often as 3 times a week. It was at these visits that Rose first saw Sara Packer. Rose recalled both Sara and the 2 children being clean and dressed nicely, and most of all, they seemed happy. Rose was relieved that the children were in a good home with Sara. In 2007, Sara and David adopted Susan, then 3, and her 1-year-old brother. The Packers renamed each children. Susan officially became Grace. The younger brother was named Josh. After the official adoption, Rose lost all contact with them. As she got older, Grace was said to be a warm and caring young girl, known to befriend children with no friends. She would open her heart to anyone and everyone, and given the chance, Grace would be your best friend. She loved music, her favorite being hip-hop and country music. During the summer months, she enjoyed the hot, long days by spending hours at the pool. Purple and light pink were her favorite colors, and she loved all types of flowers and butterflies. All the typical girly things someone her age would like. At her school, Grace was one of the first to lend a hand to her classmates and had a soft spot for students with special needs. She even had her own signature, signing her name Gracie, replacing the dot over the I with a heart. At first, Sara and David Packer seemed like the picture-perfect foster parents, taking in dozens of children over the years. But according to 3 other girls Sara and David Packer fostered, Grace grew up in a world of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. The foster daughters said Sara abused Grace and favored Grace's biological brother Josh over her. The abuse of Grace started when she was 4, with both Sara and David locking Grace in her bedroom that was rigged with an alarm. The foster daughters often remember Grace crying behind the locked, closed door. Sara was witnessed to be more demanding of Grace than her brother Josh. Grace had a learning disability, and sometimes she needed to be told more than once to do things. And Sara, well, she didn't have patience for that. She became a bully towards Grace, continually yelling, screaming, and hitting her. More often than not, most of Grace's time spent at the house was alone in her bedroom because either she was punished or didn't want to be around the rest of the family. Sara and David would verbally and physically abuse Grace and make her feel bad about herself. So the solitude of her bedroom gave her some comfort. She would come home from school happy, but once she was in the house, she shut down and became depressed. One of the humiliating tasks Grace was forced to do was to go around the house with a roll of toilet paper and pick up dog feces that was left frequently by the small family dog. But despite the mental and physical abuse from her adoptive parents, Grace remained warm, happy, fun, and most of all, upbeat. During their time with the Packers, one of the older foster girls gave birth. Sara urged her to place the child up for adoption, with Sara as the adoptive parent. Initially, the girl agreed, but later changed her mind and kept the child. The way that Sara and David had treated the children in the home was concerning to her, and something in her mind told her to keep the child and not let Sara be the adoptive parent. Crystal Rodak, a former foster child who lived with the Packers from 2009 to 2010, first reported strange behavior by David Packer to a worker at Impact, the agency that oversaw the adoptions of Grace and her younger brother Josh. Crystal reported to the caseworker at Impact that David Packer was overly affectionate to another foster child living in the home. David was seen allegedly cuddling with a 13-year-old on the couch. The caseworker blew off Crystal's allegations and said she had known the Packers for a long time, and both Sara and David were good people. Still not convinced by the caseworker's reassurance, in January 2010, on a hunch, she looked at David Packer's phone and found photos and videos showing him sexually abusing the other foster daughter. She alerted relatives, who immediately called the police. It turned out that David Packer began sexually assaulting the girl with intellectual disabilities when she was 15, shortly after she moved into the home, and the abuse continued until she was 18. The girl stated that David Packer moved her to a third-floor bedroom near the one he shared with Sara. Next, he would tie her to the bedpost and leave her there all night, or he would tie her to a chair and gag her. He frequently dressed her in revealing outfits and even made her go on a diet. Feeling as if she had nowhere to turn, the girl gave up, mentally and physically, attempting suicide twice while living in the home, and was eventually hospitalized. When she turned 18, she was forced to have sex with both David and Sara, again, having been tied up during sexual acts with both David and Sara. At some point during the abuse from the couple, the Packers made the girl believe she was going to be Mr. Packer's second wife. When the 2010 investigation into David Packer began, Grace, then 8, and Josh, then 5, were initially removed from the house. Caseworkers from the state and Lehigh County placed Grace with David Packer's parents and Josh with Sara Packer's parents under an informal safety plan that did not require court involvement. However, caseworkers from Lehigh County raised concerns about the appropriateness of Grace's placement after she disclosed she, too, had been sexually abused by David Packer. Sara and David Packer were referred for sex offender evaluations at Forensic Treatment Services. In describing Sara's evaluation, the report showed Sara had photographs of her 17-year-old foster child with her hands tied and holding a rope, and Sara said it was for a goth clothing line that she was starting. During those interviews, Sara confessed to having three-way sex with David and the older foster daughter, who was 18, legally over the age of consent at the time of the events. As a result of the investigation, Sara Packer lost her job as an adoption supervisor in April of 2010 and was barred from taking in any more foster children, but was able to regain custody of Grace and Josh. It was apparent that Lehigh County and Forensic Treatment Services mishandled Sara's confession, treating her sexual relationship with the foster daughter as consensual and not as a warning sign that Sara was willing to violate parent-child boundaries. When Forensic Treatment Services assessed Sara, they made note of only the older foster's child allegations against David Packer, and not Grace's, and her more extensive history of abuse. At the time, investigators did not turn up any evidence that Sara Packer knew her husband had molested Grace. However, she did admit knowing that David Packer had sexual contact with the older foster daughter. Ultimately, David Packer received an 18-month to 5-year prison sentence after pleading guilty in 2011 to sexually abusing both girls. After David Packer moved out of the house in July of 2010, Sara began to date Jacob Sullivan, a native Wisconsin, draftsman, and comic book artist. In August of 2010, Grace moved back in with Sara. Grace had spent a short period of time at Kids Peace, who treated her for aggressive and self-injurious behavior. The favoritism Sara displayed towards Grace's younger brother Josh continued and was confirmed by former friend Ginny Moyer. From Ginny's accounts, Sara's dislike for Grace was apparent. When the two met through a church group in 2012, Sara quickly introduced herself and her son to Ginny, but neglected to introduce Grace to her, leaving Ginny to ask the child her name. With David Packer in prison, Sara often asked Ginny to babysit. Ginny said it was obvious that Sara was enamored with her adopted son Josh, but was extremely cold and standoffish with Grace. To Ginny, it appeared as if Grace craved Sara's attention and wanted her love. Ginny said she broke off her friendship with Sara following a series of disturbing conversations. She said Sara told her she felt a surge of power when taking children away from their families, and confided in her that she would sometimes slip Grace a sleeping aid, though she did not say specifically what it was, and only did so on a doctor's advice. In late 2014, Sara, Joshua, and Jacob Sullivan moved to an apartment in Abington Township. It's not clear why Grace wasn't living with them, nor does anyone know where Grace lived during that time. Their landlord, Lee Cannell, kept an envelope marked Nightmare. Inside the envelope, he held a detailed record of the time Sara Packer and Jacob Sullivan were his tenants. In November 2014, Sara and Jacob rented the 2-floor apartment from him. Sara moved in with Josh, Jacob, and another young woman. Lee lived on the 1st floor, and Sara, Josh, Jacob, and the unidentified woman lived on the 2nd floor. Shortly after the couple had moved in, Lee went to the upstairs apartment for an inspection and found the 3rd floor bedroom locked from the outside with a hook and eye latch. When he unlocked the door, he saw a young woman who lived with the family sleeping on the mattress on the floor. Lee thought it was odd, thinking about what would happen if she needed to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. He addressed the issue by telling Sara and Jacob that it was a fire hazard to keep anyone locked in the bedroom. The couple's relationship with Lee was even soured further when Lee decided to unwind on a Friday afternoon by playing the Grateful Dead on his stereo. Not too soon afterwards, Jacob appeared at Lee's back door and demanded he turn off the music because it was interrupting Sara's work, which she did over the phone from home. And even though Jacob had angrily confronted Lee about the situation, Sara took a more passive approach and sent an email to Lee explaining her employer recorded and listened to her phone calls and that loud music made it difficult to do her work. She somewhat sided with Lee, saying playing music on a Friday afternoon was reasonable, and suggested that she and Lee would have to work on learning each other's routines. But despite Sara's effort to defuse the situation, Lee continued to butt heads with the couple. Both Sara and Jacob refused to schedule appointments with him to do maintenance or inspect the apartment, making it difficult for him to gain access. In addition, Lee and Jacob had gotten into another argument, this time regarding Jacob's plan to install a new door in the apartment, which Lee pointed out was a violation of their lease. And while only 4 people were listed on the lease, there were sleeping arrangements for at least 8 in the 4-bedroom apartment. They included 2 king-size mattresses on the floor of the primary bedroom, and Lee also noticed a young man and a woman arriving with a huge duffel bag, and they stayed for days. But after 6 months, Sara and Jacob broke their lease, leaving full cat litter boxes and frozen food in the freezer. When they moved, Lee had to replace the primary bedroom door because huge holes had been drilled into it in an attempt to install a deadbolt. In 2015, when Grace was 14, Sara Packer sent Grace to live with a 21-year-old cousin, Carrie Heisiger, who is a relative of David Packer. Grace's new home was 8 hours away in Valdez, a picturesque community in the Appalachian foothills in North Carolina. Many believe it was Sara's way to get Grace out of the way. Anticipating that Grace would live in Valdez permanently, her cousin painted her bedroom bright pink with baby blue trim and filled it with stuffed animals, including a giant stuffed frog. Erica Buchanan, a distant relative of David Packer, took Grace under her wing. At first, Grace was quiet, but soon afterwards, she started to open up and became more outgoing. The then 17-year-old Erica introduced Grace to the kids in the neighborhood, where she spent hours playing outside, swimming, and chasing Carrie's dachshund. She watched out for Grace, enlisting friends' younger siblings to make sure Grace wasn't teased in the halls of school, where Grace finished 8th grade and started 9th grade. She even took a vacation with her cousins in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. People who were around Grace that time said the teen seemed happy and began to thrive. The only friction between Grace and her guardians was over her cell phone and social media usage. Grace desperately wanted her own Facebook account and had started one without the knowledge of her new guardians. But fearing Grace would be taken advantage of, her cousin and cousin's husband wouldn't allow it. Then, in November of 2015, for reasons unknown, Grace went back to Pennsylvania. Even though she had left, Carrie kept the unusual color combination of Grace's bedroom, as well as the stuffed frog. The relatives who took care of Grace those 11 months were sad to see her go, but from what they understood, Grace didn't have a choice. Little did anyone know, 9 months after leaving North Carolina, Grace would be killed. The 11 months Grace spent in North Carolina was a rare, peaceful time in her life, and was a stark contrast to her life back in Pennsylvania, which was a life filled with daily abuse. When she returned to Pennsylvania, Grace attended Abington Junior High. It was there she befriended an autistic student named Bobby. Grace was not put off by his learning disability, and often, Grace would eat lunch with Bobby so he didn't have to eat alone. The boy's mother states that Grace showed patience and kindness towards him, and in return, he thought she was pretty and nice. To thank her for her friendship and kindness, Bobby gave Grace flowers on Valentine's Day. During their lunches together, Grace described to Bobby her parents as being mean, but never really said anything more to him regarding her home life. Unfortunately, Grace and Bobby couldn't see each other outside of school. The boy's mother tried reaching out to Sara, but she never responded. While at the junior high school, Grace became an excellent student and got straight A's. Even her behavior was outstanding, despite her emotional problems that required her to see a therapist. Grace, now a full-fledged teenager, had her first crush, a boy at her school. Wanting to tell the boy how she felt, she wrote him a love letter. But when Sara found out about the letter, she grounded Grace and prevented her from wearing dresses and makeup. Sara had also stopped feeding Grace and had threatened to send her to a foster or group home. This prompted Grace to write a goodbye letter to her family, which ultimately was found on the school printer. The letter read, "Mom, I want to thank you for taking me in when we didn't have the best life. I know I should follow the rules." A counselor at the school was worried that Grace's letter was actually a suicide note, so she spoke to Grace, who assured her that she would never take her own life because she loved her younger brother so much. At the end of that school year, Grace told friends she would be moving from Abington to Richland Township. Unfortunately, Grace visited her new home only once. Date: July 11th, 2016. Location: Quakertown, Pennsylvania. On July 11th, 2016, Sara Packer went to the authorities and reported that Grace was missing. Sara claimed she and Grace argued the night before regarding Grace visiting a friend's house. After the argument, Sara said Grace stole $300 and ran away from home. Between August 8th, 2016 and September of 2016, a detective working Grace's case made several attempts to contact Sara, but she was unsuccessful. On September 7th, the detective went to the home again. This time, the home was vacant. It was then the detective called Sara and asked for her new address. The same day, the detective called the Abington School District and learned that Grace and her 12-year-old brother Josh had been withdrawn from school on August 16th, 2016. She also found out that Josh was enrolled in the Quakertown School District. Eventually, Sara called the detective back, apologizing for not informing her of the move to Richland Township. At that time, she finally agreed to give the detective 2 photos of Grace, adding she had yet to hear from her. A month later, detectives went to Sara Packer's new address to let her know that Grace's name would be entered into the national database for missing and unidentified persons. She responded, "Oh, okay. I was going to call you tomorrow to see if you heard anything." At the same time, detectives talked to other relatives to see if they knew anything about the disappearance of Grace. Some said that they were just told. Others said they were unaware, adding that the last time they saw her was at a 4th of July picnic. In an attempt to locate Grace, a forensics team with a dog trained to locate human remains went to Sara Packer's home, but unfortunately found nothing. Meanwhile, Sara posted constantly on Facebook about the most monotonous details of her life, such as not getting enough sleep or Jacob Sullivan complaining about dinner. Not at any time did Sara ever mention that Grace was missing. She was even so bold to post a picture of herself and her son Josh smiling, with her arm around him. Back in Valdez, North Carolina, friends and family didn't find out that Grace had gone missing until October of 2016, when detectives contacted Carrie, the cousin that Grace had lived with. Erica Buckman, the other cousin who took Grace under her wing, thought that Grace had run away from home and was trying to make her way back to North Carolina. Erica herself even looked around for Grace, having a dream that the girl was hiding in a bunker in the woods. Date: Halloween, October 31st, 2016. Location: Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. In the Northeast, the crisp fall weather is usually a sign that hunting season has officially begun. The season is usually celebrated by groups of friends renting a cabin for the week, sharing stories, drinking beer, all the while hoping they bring home a kill that reflects their hunting skills. Some men prefer to go alone, or more often than not, father and son take a few days throughout the season for some much-needed bonding time. That Monday, October 31st, 2016, Cody Blakesy, his father, and their family dog decided to go pheasant hunting. The trip took them along Whitehaven Road, a winding road in Bear Creek Township, Luzerne County. As they drove their pickup truck, The dead leaves were picked up off the road, leading the duo to a gravel turnout inside a well-worn hunting trail. They parked the truck, and as the father and son got out, their dog bolted straight ahead. Thinking it caught the scent of a wild animal, the father and son followed the dog to an area of brush located on a hill, just 10 yards away. And instead of seeing a deer in the distance, they noticed something in the brush near the Francis E. Walter Dam. It appeared to be a body, face down in the brush. At first, Cody thought it was a mannequin, and his father turned it over. The stench and sight of a head and torso was a positive sign that this was no mannequin. But unknown to them, it was the remains of Grace Anastasia Packer. This concludes this episode of Departed in Pennsyltucky. I'm your host, Andrea Dudek. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for Part 2, A System Failed, the case of Grace Packer.